And good morning, actually. Welcome to first masterclass series with XYZ and Business Tampere, Business Oulu, and City of Helsinki, and Audiovisual Producers of Finland. My name is Ilkka Rahkonen, and I'm happy to welcome you all, especially our hosts and speakers. So consider about good and useful session, a few words about practices, because we are very many comments and questions through chat, please. You can write chat comments and questions at any time, but we will use them in the end of Q&A session. And please keep your microphones and cameras closed. But now I throw ball to Adam Tertsakian, a founder of XYZ, one of co-founder of XYZ, and a talented producer and the host of this session. He will introduce who are today with us.
Thank you very much, Ilkka. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you today. And by way of introduction, my name is Adam. I'm one of the co-founders, as Ilkka mentioned, of XYZ Films. As far as context, I'm number one, a big Finnophile. I went to Finland for the first time in 2016, and I'm embarrassed to say I've now been there about 30 times or maybe even more. It's one of my favorite places on earth, and in the process of getting to know Finland, we've also made inroads on the business side, and very proud to say that last fall I produced, along with my company, the first American film shot entirely in Finland, and that was a film directed and written by Riley Stearns, starring Aaron Paul, Karen Gillan, and Beulah Quale. And during that process, we had a lot of conversations with the city of Tampere, Film Tampere, Helsinki and Oulu, and AFI as well, and felt like there was a real opportunity for the Finnish film industry to explode, not just domestically, which is already a very solid business, but internationally as a place where Finnish talent can be exported and working in Hollywood. And also we saw a real opportunity to bring more projects to Finland. And as we started talking more, we decided to have a series of masterclasses with talented folks working in the Hollywood system. And today we're talking about screenwriting, and hopefully we can impart some information, experiences, and some wisdom, hopefully, from our very talented three writers here. So we have April Wolf, Leon Hendricks, and Tommy Workala. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves because they'll do a better job than I can, and we'll then start going into some questions. April, you want to go first?
I did not plan the cat, so I apologize for her appearance.
The cat is perfect.
She's trying to eat my headphones. I'm April Wolf, and I am a screenwriter and will be directing as well. I started off my career in development, moved to journalism, and then went into film criticism before I got my break, co-writing the 2019 film for Blumhouse Universal, Black Christmas. And I have projects on the horizon, but those are unspeakable yet.
Thank you. Leon?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Great to be here. Thanks for the invite. My name is Leon Hendricks. I am a writer-director. I am from Chicago, Midwest here. I started out as a journalist and also working a lot with nonprofits, living in the outdoors, youth development work, so children with autism or things like that. And from there, I wrote my first script. I did a few writing fellowships in LA, came out for fellowships with Fox and Universal and a few other things. And then I ended up landing with my first spec script that got on the blacklist. And from there, I started working in television and finding more projects to attach to write or direct on my own, and a couple things with the studios. So like April, a few of those things I can talk around, but not about. Thanks for the invite.
Fair enough. Thanks for being here, Leon. And last but not least, Tommy. I think you're on mute, Tommy.
Thank you, Aram.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, my name is Tommy Virkula. I'm from Alta in Norway. And I started in the business, I guess, doing some very low budget movies from Norway. That one of them I got to Sundance in 2009, which was Dead Snow. And after that, I got an agent here and started working on Hansel and Gretel, which was an idea I had since film school. And then I made that. It was a big step for me, obviously going from the small movies to the US doing that film. And after that, I've been working here a little bit, made a few movies here, and then also going back to Norway in between and doing smaller movies, which I've been enjoying that combination. So that's what I hope to keep doing.
Great. Thank you guys all for being here. So Tommy, I'm going to start with a few group questions and I'll have each of you guys answer and we'll get more specific as we go. The first one is, I'm sure, interesting to everybody watching today. And Tommy, I'll have you go first. What inspired you in the first place to become a screenwriter? And how did you go about getting there?
Well, I wouldn't say I inspired to be a screenwriter necessarily. I wanted to make movies, and in Australia, I studied in Australia. I basically went to film school on the east coast of Australia. I'm from the very north of Norway, so I looked at a map and I saw what's the furthest away I can get from Norway, and that was east coast of Australia. And I decided to go there and study film. And in the film school there, we started working in groups, and we kind of found our places. And obviously, I dreamt about directing films, but dog here somewhere. Is it your arm?
It's mine.
Okay. But in that group, we kind of found our positions, and I became the director and writer in that group. And we're just making short films, obviously. But when I finished and came back to Norway, it was more of a, like, if we're going to make a movie, I had to write it myself too. And so I wrote it with my childhood friend, and we didn't have any money, obviously. So we went back to the north, got money from dentists, from plumbers, from all kind of places, and we scrambled to make this very small movie, which is a spoof on Kill Bill, with a Laplander in the lead, which from Finland you obviously know a lot about. And yeah, so it started out of necessity, really. We wanted to make a movie. We knew what we wanted to make it about. So me and my friend wrote it, and yeah, it's been spiraling ever since.
Love it. Leon?
Yeah, so I think that for me, I was always creating little things as a kid, physically trying to make things out of like boxes, cardboard or whatever, and writing little comics and things with my friends. It was all terrible. None of it was worth anything. But I think that there was always a sense that I wanted to make something. And I think that with writing, for me, what I've noticed amongst the writers who I admire and the people who I know who are doing really interesting work is that the first thing that comes, there's the mechanical side of it, and then there's the inspiration side of it. And your ideas, I think, come from usually some point of like emotional connection. You're nostalgic for a certain kind of movie. You liked Spielberg as a kid, or you go through something, and that's where it comes from. So for me, it came from going through something. I had the mechanical side. I wanted to create things. I was writing stuff. And then I, as a young man, was dealing with, my parents' divorce, and, we were struggling financially. And I think that I just had this feeling that I wanted to be somewhere other than Chicago in the cold and by myself. And so one day, in order to avoid work, I just went and got a binder and filled with paper. And during my lunch break, I just started writing things. And it wasn't a poem or a story or a play or anything. It was really this kind of like thoughts on paper, word vomit that was just coming out as I was writing. And when I finished, it wasn't There was no form to it, and it really wasn't anything anyone would ever want to read, but it was more like a diary. And there were 10 pages of it that I wrote in like 30 minutes. So I had this feeling that things had changed, and I felt like I had exercised something. So I wanted to chase that, and that's kind of where it all started for me. And then I went to school for theater and cinema, and I got all the basics and learned about all the classics.
Very cool. I love that. And April, tell us about your journey.
It's long and weird. It's there's not like
it involves cats.
It involves cats, as always, apparently. So I grew up in, kind of a non-traditional background on the other side of the lake of Leon, in a place called Michigan, where it's also very cold and that you want to escape. For me, everyone in my family kind of went into like waiting tables, bartending, that kind of thing. So writing didn't really seem on the table for me at the time. But I was really struggling because I was the first in my family to go to college, to higher education. And I found a playwriting and fiction writing class that I took for an elective, and they were the only classes that I could pass, because I was like working, the late shift at a restaurant, and it was the only thing that could keep my attention. So I ended up gravitating towards playwriting, and I was working, in that respect through college. I was in performance myself, so I was doing a lot of stuff on the stage, random, very strange things, wrestling. I took a lot of detours. I thought I wanted to go into publishing. I couldn't get into film school because it was a little bit too pricey for me here. So I took a free ride to get an MFA in fiction writing. And so I studied that for 3 years. Really thought I wanted to do a lot of different things until I finally came back to Los Angeles and went into film development, working behind the scenes, reading so many scripts that were not great, but were still getting produced. And I was, kind of teaching myself by like the what not to do method. And then finally by the what to do method, once I got to a higher level and I was reading these scripts, that I was just like, oh, wow, these are amazing. Went into film criticism because I just wanted to talk about film and dissect film. And then was still writing and hosting a podcast on film again, because I wanted to dissect film, make my own master classes. And that's how I met a woman named Sophia Takal, the director, who read some of my scripts and then wanted to work with me on Black Christmas. And then through that, I was hooked up with XYZ, and now not only working with them, but that's my management company as well.
And we are very proud to have you. And on that note, for everyone in the audience, we're honored to be working with all three of the guests here today. So April, we're managing her as a client and also working with her on a couple projects. Tommy, we just produced a film together called The Trip in Norway, which we'll speak about in a little bit more detail later. And with Leon, we're developing an adaptation of a very cool 2013 Dutch film that is in the process of being packaged right now, and hopefully we'll be filming either later this year or early next. So very, very happy. I didn't mention that in my intro, but very happy to be working with all of you and knowing how you guys operate. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier for me to guide the discussion. April, you touched a little bit on breaking into Hollywood, and I wanted for Tommy first and then Leon to talk about briefly what was the process of breaking into Hollywood, because neither of you guys were from LA, from Hollywood. And I'm sure a lot of our guests today who are watching are either working screenwriters or aspiring screenwriters who would love to come to Hollywood once this COVID pandemic is behind us. And just talk briefly about what that was like moving here and how you went about just having your scripts and your work and yourself noticed.
Well, for me, it was, again, like I started my career writing and directing Kill Bill, which was a spoof on Kill Bill. And we didn't have a distributor. We didn't have anybody on board. We just ourselves, the little core group from film school that I brought to Alta, again, through finding money in the local, among the locals. So we made the film and I cut it in my bedroom underneath my parents' kitchen from an illegally downloaded copy of Adobe Premiere Pro that kept crashing all the time. And when we managed to cut this film together, and we brought it out to distributors. And luckily, there was one distributor who believed in it, and they put it on a few cinemas in Norway, and it became a hit, and it grew, and they put it out wide. And that made us some money because we still had some ownership of the film, just because we had made it from scratch. So we basically took everything we made, every cent, and we put it into Dead Snow, which was our Nazi zombie film. And again, like Norway, to make films in Norway, normally 98% of the films, at least back then, you have to have governmental support, because it's very hard to make a film without that in Scandinavia in general, I think. Because there's very limited amount of, like, very few films are giant hits. So you need some governmental support to get movies made. But we knew we weren't going to get it making a Nazi zombie movie. So we, again, went to private investors, and that combined with the money we made, okay, Billy, we made Dead Snow. And that, by, like, we just decided to gamble and send it to a couple of festivals, and Sundance accepted it in a midnight program. And so we went over there, the whole gang, and that's where I got an agent, and that kind of obviously opened a lot of doors for me. In that crowd, actually, that night, watching that film was Kevin Messick, who worked for Adam McKay and Will Ferrell. And he saw the film and he loved it, because it was truly a great screening. It was one of my better experiences with any of my films, seeing it on the midnight crowd in Sundance. And he was there, and he caught the film, and my agent, they asked my agent, when Tommy comes to LA, make sure we're the first meeting the first day. So when I got to LA, I met with Adam McKay and that gang over there, and I pitched them the idea of Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters, which is Hansel and Gretel 15 years later, and they become witch hunters. And just a small note on that. That was all I had, by the way. I didn't have anything else. But that idea I had in film school about 7 years before, and we had a pitching contest for our screenwriting teacher. And we had 30 seconds each to pitch the film, and I went up and I pitched Hansel and Gretel 15 years later, and they become witch hunters. And my film teacher said to me, Tommy, don't ever speak of that idea ever again until you're in front of a Hollywood producer, and I guarantee you will sell it. And so I shut my mouth, I never mentioned it again. And first meeting, the first day, they wanted it, and took me to Paramount the next day, and we sold it. And I realized that it will never be as easy ever again. Like that was just one in a million, and I was very lucky to experience that, obviously. But yeah, it was a crazy first week in Hollywood. Unfortunately, it's never been as easy ever since.
Yeah, it rarely is. It rarely is. That's a really cool story. I didn't know that background. Leon, talk about, so you were in Chicago, you got your binder, you filled it out, you realized this is what you want to do. There's stories coming out of you. How did you decide? What prompted you to say, okay, I'm going to go to Hollywood, and how'd you go about it?
So my last year in undergraduate, I was in university in Virginia. My school, oh yeah, here we go. My school is Hampton University. So I was at Hampton, and during my last year, I did 2 internships. One was with the New York Times, and one was with the Academy of TV Arts and Sciences in LA, the organization that puts on the Emmys. And the Academy placed me with CBS TV, and I went there, and I think I was the least productive intern they've ever had. I basically just went, and I discovered the joys of being on a studio lot, because they have a commissary, and I just every day would eat like blueberry pancakes and watch the back catalog of CBS shows, because they used to have them, I guess, a little bit pre-streaming everything. They just used to have these giant thick binders with DVDs. So I would just sit and watch 10,000 hours that summer, 10,000 hours of TV shows. During that time, I formed a relationship with an executive there who had also been through the internship when she was younger. And she told me that I should write a spec episode of one of their shows. A spec episode, if you're not aware, is It's a little bit of an older concept. I'm not sure people do it as much now, but the idea was that if you wanted a job on Seinfeld or on Friends or anything, any kind of show, you would try to write a show. You would try to write an episode of that show based on an idea you made up. So as if you wrote for the show for real, you would sit down and say, well, the Seinfeld gang goes to a baseball game or something. And then you try to capture the tone and the voice. So I did this for one of their shows. That got me into Columbia University. I went to Columbia and I liked my experience there for the most part, but I was not like one of the the standout students, and certainly not one of the students who I think got a lot of like financial support or production support. So from there, I kind of pivoted and was like, I wanted to direct. And then I was like, I'll just write. I'll just be a writer because it's just a lot and I don't want to have my work like have achievement gated off from me by this kind of arbitrary thing if random students want to join me. So I wrote some things similar to Tommy's story. I wrote a story that just got butchered. Every time I brought it to class, people just tell me about all the things that were wrong with it and the character. And at the time I had an internship with a guy named Tom Fontana, who's like a legend in TV. He created a show called Oz. That was a huge show for HBO in the early years here. And Tom was great. But Tom was really he was a real smart guy. And I used to try to get just a little nugget, but he was a busy guy. So every day I would ask him one question a day, and I was the guy who was in charge of lunch. So then I would put on lunch and go, hey, Tom, did you think about my question? And he would give me this really great, thoughtful answer. When I graduated from Columbia, I won a writing competition inside the school for a comedy script. That script got me out to, they send you out to LA and set up a couple of meetings. The meetings weren't really anything to write home about, but Tom also connected me with a few people. And from there, I ended up, there was a very low level exec, like an assistant at someone's production company. And he had read some things. He met me at those meetings. He read a few things over the next few years. And he said to me, he sent me an email one day, and it was very hush hush because it wasn't his official email. And he said, listen, I know someone at one of the big agencies. Would you like to meet them? And I was like, sure. So he hooked me up with the guy who's now my agent. And that guy hooked me up with my manager. And that's how I got my reps. And then I came out here after grad school, had a brutal first couple of years. I did the Fox, Universal, and Film Independent fellowships all within about 9 months of each other. And was also working like 5 jobs and had, sleeping on everybody's floor and everybody's couch. And then when you get the Universal Fellowship, you get paid. So that was the first paying gig I got. And at the tail end of that gig, I wrote this script that got on the blacklist, and that kind of was that just propelled me from that point forward.
Thanks, Leon. And just one thing I'll add based on the theme in all 3 answers is that who helps, and getting noticed helps. The biggest thing is they always say that writers write. So, no matter where you are, whether you're in Finland, in Hollywood, in Chicago, in Norway, be writing, because if you're not writing, you're not working. But at the same time, it's really important to be networking and learning and absorbing. And a lot of these breaks happen because of luck, but a lot of these breaks are also because you put yourself in the right rooms. As Tommy mentioned, with just having his film premiere and be seen by the right people, because he did the work and made the film. For April, podcasting, film criticism, talking to people, meeting Sophia, and for Leon, working on the lot and meeting the right kinds of people, and without being annoying, being able to talk to them and ask questions and learn along the way, and then get noticed by the right types of people. So I think that whether you're in LA or wherever you are, it's really important to be working and writing all the time, but also to be humble, modest, and be willing to go out there and do whatever it takes to meet people and just to be in the right kind of rooms. So just a segue, I want to get into talking about story from idea to script. And I've got about 4 questions. I'll start with April, go through a group, and I guess end with April. So the first one, April, for you is, where do you find inspiration for story ideas? Like, how do you wake up in the morning and say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to write now?
That's a big combination of things. I am generally a pretty curious person, so I read a lot of news stories and I read a lot of nonfiction books. And I'm a natural researcher. That's just kind of what I've always done, especially I think like journalism kind of trains you into doing research, into like spotting details of things. So a lot of the things that I write come from like little nuggets of like headlines or news stories, or little things that I read in a book where there's one detail that might be one sentence and I'm like, oh, that seems like that could be an actual story. Like I haven't heard anything about that. A lot of it though is for me watching a lot of movies and being like, I'm not seeing the stories that I would like to tell here, and finding those avenues of just like, I would like this if it were this, and almost trying to fix movies that I wish were better. That's the one of the ways that I do it. But like for instance, the script that I'm working on with XYZ, or it's inspired by a little nugget of a headline that came out of the tiniest small town in like Wisconsin, and then I wrote a thriller from that. And I wish that I had a practice of writing down those notes so I could remember them. But I do have a weird photographic memory that just kind of keeps churning them out. So I remember every single idea I've ever had and eventually always return to it, because I will lose my mind if I don't finish something that I've started.
Cool. I'm actually going to, Leon, let's have you expand on that as well. For you, where do you find your story ideas?
Yeah, I'm not too much different from April. I also am a super curious person. I have a weird relationship with books because I read, but some things take me a second and some things take me 5 months. So I have tended to read a lot of nonfiction. I'm really interested in trends, and I'm really interested in psychology, ways of thinking about things. So I think I tend to ask those, in theater, there's improv, and there is the concept of like yes and, like someone suggests an idea and your job is to return that idea with yes, your idea works, I will accept it, and let me add on to it. And so I think that's frequently what I see, as well as I watch movies and there's 30 minutes I'm in, and then I get off the train and I say, they should have had the brother come back to life, and that's when the movie would have made sense to me. And then that's the movie I start writing in my head. Some of that stuff goes away because that movie already exists and it's done. But there's so much, we're in such a weird time. I mean, gender, sexuality, culture, nationality, race, economics, it's all really fascinating because it's all in flux and it's all changing, more so I think than maybe if you look back at like the 60s, but we've had so many fixed periods where we knew what a relationship was, we knew what a dollar was worth, we knew what a community was, and now we're seeing all these different permutations of that. And I think that, so that sort of is endlessly inspiring to me. And then, like April, well, I don't have a photographic memory, so I write down a ton of notes on everything that is writable, and then I lose most of it. But I have, over the years, I've sort of learned to trust that if something really gets to me, if it comes back in a week or two and I go, oh yeah, that was a cool idea, then maybe I write a little bit more, and then the ideas just end up piling up. So for early scripts and things that are specs, I usually have a file that has 30 or 40 pages of like, here's a bit of dialogue, the color of the car is this, the murder weapon was that, it ends like this, and then I go, oh, this is enough to do something with, and then I actually start focusing in and trying to make it in.
Super cool. So Tommy, you have the great idea for a story. Now what?
You talking in general, or you're talking about a specific idea I had, or like?
Either way, I'd say generally speaking, you get inspired by something, you say, okay, well, that's a story I want to tell. How do you go about it? Do you start outlining? Do you start workshopping with somebody? Do you just start writing pages? What's your process?
It's different from project to project. In the beginning, we outline a lot, just because I was new to script writing, and I at school, there's different degrees on how much you really learn, but the script writing courses I found to be very informative, especially when it just comes to the practicality of it and routines. And so when I got back to Norway and started writing my first few scripts, yeah, we outlined very thoroughly, just so we knew where we're going and how we're going to end up. But now, as the trip, for example, which I co-wrote with two other writers, who's a writing team, we kind of just had loose ideas where we wanted to go and where we wanted to end, but nothing in between. So it was a very fun exercise in that aspect, because I wrote the first 6 pages and then I sent them to the other writers, and they came back with 5 more pages, and then I answered with 5 pages. It was almost like we were trying to up each other's game and surprise each other. And that again made for a very fun script in the end, I thought, and it was fun trying to do something new. But I would say, yeah, it depends on the project. For Hansel and Gretel, which was an idea I had for many years, I really didn't again know where I was headed with it necessarily. So that was when I started to write that. It was a lot of outlining and trying different things and working with the producers over here who had so much more experience than me, and using them and kind of throwing ideas at them, and they would help me. And obviously Adam McKay is a great writer himself, so just working with him and his producer was a fantastic learning curve for me.
Awesome. April, how about for you? You got the amazing idea that you think is going to be a winner. How do you go about putting pen to paper? What's your process?
I'm a compulsive outliner. Before I go to script draft, I generally do a really detailed outline. And it usually lands between 16 and 23 pages. There are a few screenplays that I've written where I didn't do an outline, but those were non-traditional structures. So I needed to kind of think outside of my normal routine. But most of the time I will, do a, like writing it like it's a short story, essentially. So dialogue is all there, everything is all there. Of course, when you get to script draft, you always find surprises and things that you could never do when you're just kind of writing it in paragraph form. But it's usually all on the page before I even go to draft. And that usually takes me, I write really fast, and I don't usually write until I have the story solid in my head. So an outline will usually take me about a week to write, and a screenplay will usually take me about a weekend. But most of the time I'm spent, like for 3 or 4 months just thinking about it in my head. I think Leon said something about that too, where it's just like, if it's like kind of letting your subconscious just work out a lot of the problems until you're ready to put it on the page.
And April, to follow up, so you've got it all on the page. You somehow write a script in a weekend, which I find remarkable. But from there, how do you know when the time is right to show it to the world? Like, and the world being whether it's your producers on the project or friends or agents or reps. Like, what is your process where you feel like a script's obviously never done, but how do you feel like, okay, well, this is my baby, I've been working on it, and now I feel okay having other people look at it?
I think for me, I have a pretty good internal gauge of whether or not something is up to par for me, because there's stuff that you will never see. I will never show XYZ because it is just not done, and it just won't be, so I have a pretty good gauge at this point, because I've been doing this so long that I know when something is not up to my standards, or when it's not going to be up to someone else's standards. I used to, when I was like a younger writer in my 20s, I used to kind of get lazy with that and be like, everything I write is gold. And it's just like, not, it's just not. And, you know, it's true though, the longer that you do this, the more that you realize what is right and what isn't. And it's not something that you can even have like a shortcut to. It's just this kind of experience of creating that gauge. But also, I really suggest the same thing that I did, reading so many scripts that were not great, you know, that would get the pass very quickly from the, you know, production companies when I was working in development, because you start to understand what tics you have, what kind of habits you have in your writing that are cliche or that just aren't going to serve you in the long run. And I think that helps develop a gauge in terms of deciding what is good and what is not.
That's great. Thank you. Leon, you want to expand on that a bit in terms of how you know when this thing that's been in your head and on your piece of paper is ready for other people to look at?
I mean, I think this is a good question that to me is, it's kind of at the core of one of the more difficult things about writing, which is taste and voice to some degree. The weird thing about writing is that before Tarantino exists, there's not a Tarantino, even if there's the influences of Tarantino that are out there. So it's a little bit like, you know, if you're a baker, you can sell bread because people know the concept of bread. They know what good bread is, blah, 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 blah. But if you're the first baker, it's like, what the hell is bread? Why should I buy bread? Why does this matter? So the weird thing about writing is, for much of your career initially, and then project to project, in terms of all of the stakeholders, whether that's actors or producers or partners or financiers, you're sort of trying to create a product that doesn't have a market while you kind of create the specific market for your product, and you're the only one who knows what the recipe is supposed to taste like. So I have tended to, I've gone back and forth a lot in my life, but I think that where I've tended to land is, part of what you're really selling as a writer is not like words on a page. You're selling a voice and a perspective. So hone your perspective, you know, watch movies, read scripts, like April's saying, have an opinion on the world and on fiction and everything, on genre. And once you have that, I think if you're passionate about it, you will know. This is a weird way, it's very Jedi, like very Yoda what I'm saying, but you wrote a script and your intent was for it to be funny. Do you think what you're reading is funny? Do you think the scenes are funny? Do you think that the theme is achieved, or that the person has become a better person by the end of the script? Those things I think are, to me, the biggest part of it, because everything else comes down to, I think, matters of taste in sort of smaller mechanical things. Like, should the guy open the door before he gets in the car, or say the line first? That stuff, I think you'll always, like, when you say like a script is never really done, I think that's the thing that I would assume that you're referring to, because if you write a thriller and it starts here and they get the money and then the guy gets shot at the end and then he escapes to the island with the love of his life, then the story is that, yes, we all know that's where we want it to go, but here's those little pieces. So for me, it's really just it's a gut check. Like, I sit down and I say, I know what I was intending to do. Did I get there? Not necessarily, is this the greatest scene in the history of scenes, but like, does this scene function? Do I laugh? Do I see the heart in it? All the rest.
Yeah, that's great. So the next question, I'm going to go to Tommy and then April, and I want you guys to answer in two different ways. The question is, you've now written the script. You know it's great. You showed it to a couple friends or whoever, and you've got the validation. What's next? And Tommy, you know, I want you to talk about it because you've had representation pretty much from the beginning, with your Norwegian films getting seen and lightning in a bottle in terms of Hollywood saying we want to represent you and work with you. I'm assuming for you, it's showing it to your reps, your managers and agents, and getting their feedback. And then what typically happens from there? And then April, I'll ask you, before you had representation, what would happen from the moment you felt like you had a good script? So let's start with you, Tommy.
Well, I mean, yeah, obviously after come to a place where I feel good about it, I'll give it to my reps. And I think one of the hardest things in general is getting honest feedback on a script. People are too nice often, but my agents, luckily, at least, like, because I've been with my agent from the beginning, and he gives very honest feedback on my scripts. And sometimes, yes, he's ripped some stuff apart that I spent months doing, and they just didn't like it. But more often, luckily, they're excited. They have some notes. They have good notes. Well, they have notes. Many times good notes, and then I'll adjust, of course. I'll get into a place where we all feel excited about, and then it's finding the right producer for it. That is most often the path for us. Yes, I mean, in the past, I've developed a lot of things with people that I worked with before, like Adam McKay and those guys. I've been involved in several projects. Some that happens, like some that have gotten further than others, but it's about finding the right partner. And then when you got the right producer on board, it's another round of notes and getting it to a place where they feel good about it too. And then you start trying to set it up somewhere, a financier, which is always nerve-wracking. And if you're lucky enough to get a bite, then it's more notes and more rewrites and hopefully getting it to a place where you're talking about getting it into production. But it's always steps. And it's always and it can be frustrating at times, of course, with the different type of notes you get from different people and different steps. And of course, on Hansel and Gretel, I can to deal with a studio of Paramount size. And remember, before this, I only made 2 small movies in Norway. It was a brand new thing for me, just dealing with that whole thing. And it was a huge learning curve and how to deal with notes and how to adjust notes in a good way and get people happy and on board. And they say, like, one of the first things that everybody in the business are told is choose your battles. And in hindsight, I probably, on that project specifically, I didn't fight enough in the script phase, but I fought too much in the post-production phase. And again, that was a huge learning curve for me. I should have stood more my ground when it comes to the script, and then it will be a smoother process further down the road, hopefully. But again, like, I had no idea what I was going through, honestly, on that project. But yeah, that is kind of for me, it's been the last few years. You go to the agents and then you rewrite it, you go to producers, rewrite it, and hopefully a financier and rewrite it and try to get it to a place where they actually give you the money.
A good general nugget that I've heard, and this is, I've never read the Hansel and Gretel script, so this is not me saying it was a bad script. I'm sure it was great, but a good general nugget I've heard is that it's very hard to make a bad movie out of a good script, and it's also very easy to make a bad movie with a bad script, right? So yeah. It's one of those things where the script is really the blueprint. So again, this is no reflection on that script because I never even read it, but if the script is great, it's hard to make the movie bad. If the script is not great, then you have a shaky blueprint for what you're trying to make into a great film. For sure,
but again, like, it was on that one specifically. This was new to me because in Norway, there's really nobody giving you notes. Like, it's you and the producer, and if you get the money, you make the film you want to make, and that's it. And here, there was even, I would say, most of the notes came after we got the green light. A few weeks before getting in production, it seemed like suddenly then everybody started reading it, like, higher up, and then we started changing things after we cast it, after I'm on the ground in Germany. So yeah, it was a crazy experience, and I'm glad I had it for sure.
Yeah. So April, talk about before you had representation, because I'm sure a lot of the people who are watching, they might have representation in Finland or not, but they are just learning about Hollywood and probably don't have representation yet. Before you had representation, you write a script that you think is great, that you feel really good about. Now what do you do? How do you get it seen? Who do you show it to?
Yeah, because I'm a weird case where I didn't have representation until the month before Black Christmas was coming out. So I had already written a studio movie before I signed with XYZ, and I still don't have an agent, and I haven't had a need for one as yet. But for me, it was really, really hard to find anyone, you know, like what Tommy was saying, it's hard to find people to give you notes. I am a person who, because I come from journalism and fiction writing, I love the slaughter of notes in a sense. Like I kind of love the challenge of, you know, like when you're writing like a news article, your editor comes in and just red marks everything, turns it around. You're just like, it's not even like what you had written, but then you have to rewrite it on the fly within an hour. And that's the kind of pace that I like, and the kind of, you know, editing and notes that I enjoy. And it's hard to find those people in the film world who know what they're doing. There's like probably any number of people who would like to redline and slaughter your work, but people who know what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish, which isn't necessarily what everyone else is trying to do. There's a gentleman over at XYZ who I trust implicitly, Alex Williams, who I will give every single thing that I have for him to gently slaughter, because he I think understands, like the few readers that I have, that I'm trying to go for something a little bit stranger, and that we're trying to accomplish the goal of the story, not the story that they want to tell. So for me, it was really hard. I did find one person who was willing to read my work, and she was able to take my work to a production company. Ultimately, they passed on it. I've had like a lot of close calls over my career with production companies being like, oh, this is great, and then it going nowhere. And then completely losing my self-esteem and being like, I'm gonna give up, and then having to do it all over again. I, through that process, have realized that I'm my own best editor. One of my favorite things to do is to write the script, set it aside for a week or two, and then come back and then be my own editor. Look at it as though it's not me, it's just a script that someone else wrote, and try to find a new way into it. Which is also, I think, a skill that you develop if you work in development, which is something that I highly suggest if you wanted to go that route, because you're constantly trying to solve the problems of other scripts, and it makes you just think really quickly on your feet and become that kind of problem solver for everything, even your own work. But for me, it's so hard to tell people too, because I get this question a lot of like, well, what did you do with the script? Where did it finally go? How did it finally get to this point? And honestly, I don't think that I would have gotten to this place if I hadn't developed some friendships through the podcast that I hosted, of a lot of like-minded people, because so much about this business is finding your community of people, even if they're not your readers, just your community of people that you can kind of like text when you're like having a really bad day, and they understand the intricacies of what this industry is. And so I found like a handful of women who are filmmakers, and that I felt comfortable sending them my work and them sending me theirs. And so I think Sophia Takal was, you know, like my big booster in that sense, you know, finding that community, and developing your own sense as an editor. Those are the two things that I would suggest, especially if you have no connections, because I had zero connections when I came out here. It has been just a slog, but it was a matter of me being like, I love these things. I'm going to put my love for these things, this like different types of movies, out into the world. And you all will know what kinds of movies I love, why I love them. And hopefully all of that energy that I just put out into the world will come back with other people who feel the same way about those things too. Does that answer your question? I feel like it's, yeah. I have no like straight way into any of this stuff.
No, I think it does. And it leads me to my next question, which I'll have Leon touch on first, which is, you know, you've shared the script, you've gotten you know, your representatives, if you have them, get excited about it, or you've hustled and gotten into the right producers, or hopefully the right producers, and they like it and they want to get on board. And, you know, maybe there's a financier or a studio or a streamer or somebody on board now. And to Tommy's point, everybody has notes. And you know, the question I have is, writing's a creative pursuit, but filmmaking, especially in Hollywood, is a business. It's an industry. And so, you know, you have your creative instincts, which are your North Star, which are telling you what you're doing is right. And then you've got one or many different voices telling you to change the script and to do certain things that, you know, might make it, in your opinion, better, worse, more commercial, less commercial. How do you navigate that? Like, how do you not be, you know, obstinate or difficult, or I'm putting quotes around these things because a lot of these are labels that come in Hollywood, while also keeping your integrity, but being able to maybe see where, yeah, I have to make some changes to make the script more commercial, or for it to find the marketplace, or just to get it made. Leon, why don't you talk about that first?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that obstinate and difficult to me frequently, especially depending on the background of the filmmaker, sometimes the gender of the filmmaker, sometimes are things that people say out of a place of perspective. So sometimes people look at a response to things, and you know, a woman says it, and everyone takes it slightly differently than they would than if a man were to say it. My experience is that there are people, you know, I've been here only 5 years, but I've had a really good arc and a really good rise. So, you know, a bunch of the things that I can't talk about are these we were just talking this week to this like massive mega Hollywood producer director type. And, you know, we're going to do a project together, and all these things, you know, what I have always believed just as a human being is that I want to be in rooms with people who are more interesting, like smarter, better equipped than me, because my presumption is if I'm the smartest person in the room, like this is the apex of achievement I'm going to have here. So I want to be in the room with Spielberg and have him be like, every idea you said is terrible except for this one thing. Because my assumption is I think this guy's kind of a genius. So, and he's had 70 years of doing this. So, you know, maybe I can like learn stuff here. So I think that the start for me is that I don't come into things, you know, as a writer, I think I'm fairly confident. And I don't really come into things, you know, with the need to prove that I deserve to be in the room or anything like that. My very arrogant way of thinking about this is that when I get a call, my agents get a call and say, hey, there's this book at this place, will you adapt? Or hey, there's this TV show that they need a writer for, will you go in? My thought process is, generally speaking, I've never met this exec, or I met them once before, but they called me because they know that I can do something that not everyone can do. So when I get in the room, I'm like, I'm here because I have talent, or because I've proven that on other projects with a script you read or something. Your assessment of me is that I bring a certain quality. So I don't have to fight for my place. So when people say they think something is right or wrong, this is a good scene, this is a bad moment, my feeling is generally like, hear them out. It costs nothing to listen to people, hear what they say. Sometimes people will say things because they are in a meeting and they need to fight for their place at the company. And sometimes people will say things because deep down they really, really believe it. And both of those people can be right, and both of those people can be wrong. So I try to hear people out. I say, you know, and Arm, you guys have worked with me, Alex, I've worked with Alex also, as April was saying, and you guys, you know, whether or not a handful of people in Hollywood who I meet say Leon is obstinate or difficult is not really my biggest concern. What I would prefer is that 70% or 80% of the people I work with say Leon is a guy who is not going to give us anything he doesn't believe in. He's going to fight for the stuff he thinks is integral, and for the things he just kind of likes or thinks is the right way to go, but he's not sure of, if we push back, he's going to let it go. So that's a big part of it. And the other part of this, I think, is just the professional business art thing, which is to say, I can come in and say, look, I want to do this fantastic homage to Kurosawa or something like that. And I'm dealing with like a 22-year-old or 24-year-old exec who's just like, never heard of the guy. And that's fine. That's their world experience. That's the world that we're moving into. So I don't, you know, I think what we're doing is art, but I also think that it's fueled by commerce. And I think that sometimes, you know, when you have a big sequence that is, you're blowing up all these things and it goes into the past and it comes back into the future, it's just practically not a reality of what's going to happen for your $8 million movie. So you have to say, you know, you have to be willing to hear out people who are above. And sometimes, yeah, like you have to, those people who are bringing money, those people who are bringing all of their experience or their expertise, or they're a big deal or they're a big actor. Sometimes, yeah, you have to hear those people say, I'm not going to do that scene, or we can't afford that scene, or this scene is like too big for this small movie. And you have to say, that sucks. I really want to do it, but I also want to make this thing. So you come in with your, I think your goals, with your like objectives, with your, you know, like any relationship, what are the non-negotiable things for me here? And I've totally walked away from big deals on things because they wanted to say something with the work that I thought was not a message I wanted to put out in the world. And sometimes I've been on things which is like, I'm desperate to do this project. So yes, I will sacrifice this one thing that I really, really wanted to put in here.
Great answer. Great answer. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Tommy. And if you want to speak about notes process, because I know on Hansel and Gretel, you mentioned that some of the notes came in after it was greenlit. Feel free. And then I've got another question for you as well.
Well, I can just speak shortly, but I mean, everything Liam's saying is correct. And obviously that's a big part of the process. And I'll admit, I'm not, I sometimes, I have reacted badly to notes. It's not necessarily a smart thing to do. And through experience, though, I made a rule for myself that when I get notes, I will always wait at least 24 hours before I get back, because often when I have time to think about them, they make a lot more sense. If like when I first see notes, I can get really defensive. This doesn't work. That doesn't work. That's still stupid. And then when I start thinking about them and I calm down a bit and I let them sink in, I say, well, this is kind of smart. I can do this with that note, and I can address, like, I just, yeah, so that's a rule that I just made myself to experience. And because, yeah, my reaction is always, in the beginning, it maybe wasn't the best. But I will also say, because the last few years, I've been doing work just as a writer as well. And I've seen to myself that I deal with it in a different way. Because obviously the director, I'm here to serve him, and I've been lucky the last few years. I've written one script for Adam McKay and one for David Leitch, and obviously are guys that I admire and I look up to. So being a writer for them, I just really learning from them and seeing what they put emphasis on and what they think is important and what's not important, and doing notes through that path has been a different point of view for me, which has been a good learning exercise as well. So yeah, no, I mean, but in the end, like, it is a collaborative process, and I would say, like, one last thing about making a film in Hollywood versus Norway, and RMU, obviously you've been part of the trip, but I would say that film and that script, and we tried it because we had a short window. We wanted to do it this fall before the snow came in Norway, and we wanted to do it as an American film first. We wrote the script in English. And we had interest from a few financiers, but I think we know that if we had gone that route, we would have had to tone down the script quite a bit to make it in the US, or to make it with American actors or American financiers, because it was a pretty out there script. But the moment we greenlighted it in Norway and we got Numi on board, we knew we got to make the movie we wanted to make. And that's a freedom, and it's a luxury, of course, but you give up other things. We had to cut the budget, we had to cut the days of shooting, so you give up other things. But in the plus side is you get to make the exact film that you and the producers wanted to make in the first place. So there's fewer steps to go through making a film in Scandinavia, obviously.
So that was a great, you segued to what my next question was going to be, which you already answered, which was the biggest difference between working in Hollywood and Norway. So I want to expand on that a little bit and ask you, you know, as a Norwegian filmmaker and writer, what advantages, 'cause again, a lot of our audience here is hoping to, we're already on the same path in terms of going out to LA and working, you work regularly both in Hollywood and in Norway. I'm sure a lot of our audience would like to be working regularly in Finland and also in Los Angeles. What advantages or disadvantages do you think that having that point of view or being from a different country gives you as a screenwriter working in Hollywood?
If it's a different point of view, I'm not sure. That's a tough question to answer. But in terms of practicality and how it's been working for me, obviously the stuff I just mentioned, there are pros and cons either place, obviously. And I made 2 films over here. It was Hansel and Gretel and What Happened to Monday, and there's obviously bigger budgets and bigger stars, and there's you're playing on a bigger canvas. But after Hansel and Gretel, I went back to Norway and did Dead Snow 2, and that was part of a process because I was very, and then I've been talking about this before, so it's not a big secret, but the process of making Hansel and Gretel was a tricky one. I had fantastic producers who were with me all the way, but yeah, we had some clashes with the studio, and the movie that ended up on screen was very different from the script I wrote. And luckily, it was a financial success, but it wasn't received well, and it was always hard. It was still hard for me to watch that film, so I went back and did Dead Snow 2, and a lot of there's a lot of energy in that film, I think, in Dead Snow 2, and a lot of frustration going into that script, and the release of making the film exactly the way I wanted was a very it felt very good after the experience of Hansel and Gretel. So, but in hindsight, again, like I was very inexperienced when I did that film. I learned so much from the process that I've taken with me to other projects, obviously. So looking back on it now, I'm very happy with all that. But yeah, that's why, because of that experience, though, I realized that if I can continue making films in Norway as well, it will be very valuable to me, just because we have total freedom and can make exactly what we want. But my ambitions is also to make bigger films over here if possible. And because some ideas are just too big, some scripts that I have are just too big to make in Norway. And now if they're going to be made there over here. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question in any way.
Yeah, no, it does. I think that having your point of view and your experience and knowing how the two industries work, I think also it probably gives you a little bit of flexibility to say, okay, well, if I have an idea that isn't right for Hollywood, that doesn't mean it isn't right. And that's probably a really liberating thing, because for a lot of other people, it's like, if it's not right for Hollywood, it's just not right. Whereas for you, and we'll talk about the trip more in a second, but to say, okay, well, if it's going to have to go through this whole process, I can go make it in Norway and still prove out and make it amazing. And having that kind of point of view and flexibility, I think must give you a lot of creative freedom.
Yeah.
Sure. April, you mentioned that your first big credit is on a wide release Blumhouse Universal studio film. Walk us through that. I think that we would all love to hear, just in terms of from the minute you started working on it, what that process was like, how your role changed or didn't change after the script was greenlit. And just, I'm sure our audience would love to be writing wide release studio films. So just talk a little bit about what that experience was like.
I think that the experience of writing this film is different from other studio films, because when you're working under the Blumhouse banner, you mostly have a low budget. It's like you're still working in an indie atmosphere. You still have a budget that is like a nice indie budget, like 5 million. It's just that your marketing and your distribution is just, there's so much money invested into that part of it. So it's a tough thing, because you are trying to write something that is big enough to be seen in a theater, but on a really, really tiny budget. And I think that can be its own obstacle challenge that you may or may not ever want to do. For me, this film was something that is the process was different for this film than from, I think, anything else that they had done. We had, I got brought on to the project in early April of 2019 and was given the directive that we had to shoot in New Zealand in by July 1st. We had to start shooting. And so that meant that I had to go down to New Zealand, and I was getting notes throughout all of our prep, depending on how our budget changed, how our cast changed. So I was making changes nonstop, even through the shoot, making very large structural changes because we didn't have time and we didn't have money for it. It was actually quite expensive to shoot down in New Zealand too. So we ended up kind of shaving off a lot of our budget for that. So there would be a lot of times where I would have this really amazing, it's a horror film. So I have this really amazing set piece with a kill that was just like, oh, we don't really have the money for that now. And I'm like, okay. So then you have to rewrite it, like a week before it's shot and make sure that all the props are there and that they can be made and that the location works and that it fits with the story. And it was just like, a lot of work nonstop. So like Tommy was saying, like you do get notes constantly and not at the best times because it really depends on when someone is no longer busy and has the moment to get eyes on the script, and then they're like, oh no, we can't have that, that will cost too much, or no, we can't have that, we need to keep to a PG-13 rating. And that is a really kind of difficult thing to negotiate. And that's also something that you have to worry about, is the rating system when you're working in the US and you're writing here. It's really weird. Our MPA is arbitrary, and it is has a lot of bias of like the types of content that it allows. For us, it was really difficult. There's a lot of stories around like women that aren't allowed to be used in a movie that is PG-13, that feel realistic and normal to me, but an MPA like board of people who I don't really know what their faces look like, they can decide whether or not it is offensive to the masses. And so that's a really difficult thing to negotiate, especially if you're working in genre, which I'm sure Tommy had a lot of interesting things of trying to negotiate that for a rating system. But it's really tough. I tend to like indies now because of that experience. And I'm
so
also
do we.
Yeah, exactly. I'm also working in television now on my next project, and I'm starting to realize the freedom that we have more in television than we do in film, in the US specifically. And maybe that will change. Maybe there will be a kind of evenness to what the kind of content and that we allow in those spaces. But in terms of studio, I feel like everyone's kind of after a coveted PG-13 everything because they want to get as many butts in the seats as possible. But it makes your job as a screenwriter really hard, because then you're trying to chase what you think studio execs or what audiences want, and that's not always what you should be writing.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer. I want to segue to some audience questions that we've got. And before I do, I wanted to add a quick little note about the whole MPA rating system, which is ridiculous. XYZ did a film called The Raid, which was a Indonesian martial arts film from 2011. And Sony Pictures Classics picked it up to release it in the US, and we were all very excited about it. And we sent it into the MPA. It was a very violent film. And we were waiting for them to come back and tell us that we had to cut this, that, and the other thing, which all would have been very, very painful and difficult decisions to make, because those same things were what made the movie so great. And in a weird twist of fate, they came back and told us their only note was that the blood was too red, and that they wanted us to change the color of the blood throughout the film. And what we came to realize was that we could actually change the color of the blood to look more like blood, which would make it more realistic. And we did that. And once we did that, which made the film ironically more realistic, they came back and said, great, you now have the rating you need. So, you know, we've had some very weird, unexplainable situations, but that was a really interesting one that, and anyone who hasn't seen The Raid, you should check it out, given this story, because how it got the rating it got, despite some miraculous, amazing, unexplainable, super badass violent kills I'll never understand, but it was just the color of the blood that the MPA didn't like. But to switch gears, audience question, and I'll start with Tommy, and then if anybody else wants to weigh in, feel free. But talk about the process on, you know, I know you've adapted before. Undying Love is a very famous graphic novel that you've been adapting for the screen. So talk about the process of adapting an idea like an existing piece of IP, and what that's like, both in a fun or opportunistic way, but also in the challenges that come with that as well.
Yeah, I've adapted 3 things so far in my career, and Undying Love was a comic recently, that was for Dave Leitch, and Irredeemable was another comic from McKay. And then recently I also adapted a book in Norway, a thriller, an airplane thriller, hostage kind of film. And the book, those things were very different. Adapting a comic, adapting a book. The comics, you have a lot more freedom, it felt like, and you take the core idea, especially Undying Love. It was it had so many crazy big ideas. Like there was a talking fox, and well, I guess after Guardians of the Galaxy, it's not as crazy anymore. But it's a vampire story with a lot of crazy fantasy elements, and they wanted to take a lot of those elements out, and that's what they said when it came to me. And write it more as a love story, focusing on a simple relationship. So again, like in the comic, I took what was the core of it, the soldier falling in love with a vampire and their journey, and then basically a lot of it around it was new stuff, new ideas. But again, like there's brilliant moments in the comics that I used and pulled out. The first 15 is very close to the comics, and then the third act is all me. So yeah, it again, like. But the book was a very different experience, because the book was very, very solid. It was very it was written very filmatic, but of course it's obviously way too long, and there was stuff you had to cut and stuff you had to make. There was not enough action necessarily for what they wanted, so bringing a little bit more action into it. But the book was just okay, and I had never adapted a book before, so I tried to actually outline it again, like and just strip the book down. And I read the book obviously a few times, and then I started outlining by going through the book once more and pulling out scenes as I went along, and what I need and didn't need, and just strip it to the bones basically. But still, the first draft was like 170 pages, I think. So there's a lot of cutting down after that again. But yeah, but those two were very different for me. Like the book was it's very close to the book, the script that I wrote on that, but the comic is very, very different and a lot more freedom. But in terms of process, yeah, it was, again, like just as a writer, I feel like I've developed a lot the last 3 years of again writing for other directors, but also adapting material and trying my hand at that, and comics. So because I read a lot of comics when I was younger, but then it was a big pause for me in reading comics and going back into comics and reading all this. Because I was also involved, actually, I'm sure you know the TV show called The Boys now, that is on Amazon, was a big hit. I was involved a lot earlier when they tried to do it as a movie with McKay as director. And again, then reading all those comics and reading those giant books on The Boys, and just it reignited my love for comics again, just the freedom of storytelling, and like no idea is too crazy, and as we see on the TV show The Boys, the reason why it works so well, because they really capture the spirit of the comic, and the craziness and the darkness of the storylines. So when I adapted Irredeemable and Undying Love, I really tried to keep that in mind. Like the reason why these comics worked in the first place was because they had some extreme ideas and some really out of the box ideas. So I try to keep that and stay true to that, but at the same time elaborating on just to make the story work for a film.
Excellent, thank you. And Leon, I want you to touch on this too. You're obviously adapting something with XYZ right now, and I know you've adapted before. What do you find in terms of the differences in adapting versus an original idea, both for better and worse?
So the benefit of doing something original is that nobody has an opinion on what the like natural state of it is. And so you come in and you say, I want to do a sexy James Bond thriller satire, and people go, okay, I guess that's the target. When you have a comic like The Boys, you know, I'm doing some development now on some like massive IP things, and when you have those things, even before audiences or fans get a hold of them, even the executives are like really cognizant of, well, but does that jive with this character and who they've been before in the books or in the comic or whatever. I think to me the best adaptations tend to take, like Tommy was intimating, tend to take the spirit and the tone of projects and deliver that, and then they find a way to take full advantage of the medium that we're working in, which is film or television, as opposed to what a comic can do. So for me, and you know, the story that I'm doing with XYZ is a bit different because it was already a movie. So it's like, what about, but the interesting thing there was it was a movie that was, like you said, it was a Dutch film. So what about that culture when you're doing a crime thriller is different than our culture? So our movie is set in Chicago, and I grew up there. And one of the things I noticed about the movie that I think I brought up to you guys was I was like, yeah, so I was with the movie the whole time. But at a certain point after watching the movie, I was like, where were all the cops? Because in America, the notion of this much crime going without any cops showing up in like a massive scene is just not possible. So, especially not in a big city. So there are things like that that are very pronounced that come out. But then one of the things that I see about the film that I love is like there is a really primal sort of existential struggle that this character is going through, and I'm like, that is a one-to-one. That's just a human experience thing. That's not really cultural. So I can put that here, and that's what gets exciting. So I think the benefit of having the IP or the book or the whatever is you don't have to go through the process of discovering or finding or being inspired by a theme. It's there in the book, and then you go, okay, I'm either into this theme about eternal love, or you know, the secret darkness in the world, or whatever, or family. You just pull it out, and your job is to elevate that subtext then when you are writing the new adaptation.
Excellent answer, thank you. Leon, I want to stay with you and have April weigh in as well on this next question, which is that you are writing and have written for film and for TV. Talk about the differences in terms of process and creativity and logistics and, you know, overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest differences to me are mostly the professional structure of things, the number of execs you deal with, the number of considerations. I always say that when you write if you write a pilot, you're not writing a movie. It's almost like you're writing a movie that writes other movies. So you're creating a world that has the ability to consistently iterate on itself all the time. That comes with so many questions, and that comes with so many people saying, right, but you know, when you write a film and you go, yeah, and then John Wick kills all these guys, and then he pisses off the organization and says, I'm out. I'm no longer an assassin. Nobody says, wait a minute, but 10 years from now, what's going to happen to his best friend's dog? You know what I mean? But when you do that with a movie, or when you do that with a television show, that's exactly how it works. People want to know how every single thing that you set up branches out into every other direction. I don't find personally the process of writing almost anything. I mean, I've written some short fiction stuff. I'm starting to write a novel now. I don't find the process of writing almost anything that different from the process of writing anything else. I think even if you're talking about a news article, to some degree, it's like, here's the characters, here's the story, here's the twist, here's the thing, and you're suggesting something. I mean, not always pure sort of straight up journalism, but so much of what we see now is you're intimating a story to your audience, you're intimating some thematic things to your audience. So for me, the format itself has small differences. I don't think that's something that you need a masterclass for. I think you can look up two scripts and say, okay, this is a film script, this is a TV script, here's how all the things are on the page, here's how long the script is. But the idea of a beginning, middle, and end, and characters who change or grow or don't change and don't grow, I think is common to both.
Cool. April, talk about your experiences in TV versus film.
I have had thus far a really great experience in TV, but I think part of that is because I'm working with really great executives. And I think that can maybe make or break your experience. But they are people who are extremely creative, and I get to look at their track record of shows that they've created, and I'm like, okay, yes, this is something where they're okay with taking chances, which allows me to take more chances on structure or voice or tone or anything like that. And so I think that I've gotten very lucky in that respect. I've definitely heard people have some kinds of like network horror stories and things, of course, but I'm working with a like a big cable company, so it's not like I'm working on a CBS show that has to have 24 episodes a season and has to appeal to every person in America. So you can be a little bit more pointed with what you're doing, and that's one of the best parts, I think, of the difference between film and TV for me so far, is that you can appeal to a niche when you're working in TV. You don't have to appeal to everyone. Of course, there is commercialism in that, and I want to appeal to as many people as possible, but you can have kind of strange inside jokes to things, or have a callback or a throwback to a TV show or a movie from the 1950s, because some people in the know might get it. So you can be a little bit stranger with your choices, and they're just kind of like, yeah, let's go with it. And the sensibilities of film don't condone that all the time, and I understand that, because the financial reality of filmmaking is just really different from TV. But for me, there's been more freedom on the TV side thus far, and even in adapting an IP like I'm doing right now, beloved, been around since the 1970s, but I still feel like there's freedom for me within that format.
Excellent, thank you. Tommy, we have a question which feels custom tailored for you based on my experience with you. What is an audience question? What is the fastest you've ever gone from an idea to a film that has been made? And maybe it was a trip, maybe it wasn't, but the trip was probably the fastest that I've ever seen an idea or script turn into a movie. So just talk to your experience.
Yeah, it would be like Hansel and Gretel. I told a story like from when I pitched it to producers, we sold it to Paramount the day after, and we started writing straight away. But I actually went a few years before it got made, because Paramount didn't pull the trigger until other fairy tale movies started happening. And then, oh shit, we got a fairy tale movie.
That's how it works. Yep.
On the trip, yeah, it was. I think we wrote it very fast because we wanted to. A lot of people involved had projects that were pushed and delayed because of COVID. And I was going back to Norway. I was having my first child, so we're thinking, okay, maybe before that all happens, there's a chance I can shoot a film in Norway, because Norway was very little affected by the pandemic, and they're still shooting movies there. So we wrote a script in probably 6 weeks, I think. But obviously we had a first draft earlier than that, but we had a finished script in 6 weeks. 6 weeks, we brought it out to you, Aram, of course, and some actors. And yeah, I mean, it went super fast, and we had another six weeks of prep. And while we were soft prepping, we still didn't know we had all the money, but we got there eventually. And yeah, it was probably the quickest process from the beginning of an idea to a finished film. It was all within 6 months. Yeah, that was, and I think you can feel that in the film too, in the project. It has that energy to it, and it has a sense of playfulness that if we had spent a lot more time with the script and development, and it would maybe have felt a little bit different. And I think sometimes it worked to the advantage of the actual product. And I'm super proud of the film. Yeah, it's maybe already being released. Well, you know more about that than me, but we'll see. But they're hoping to put it in theaters in Europe pretty soon, and then Netflix will release the rest of the world.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that. I mean, I've had the company now for 13 years, and that was definitely the fastest I've seen a project happen. And what was especially amazing was it was during a pandemic. So for everybody out there who feels like, oh, like whether it's a pandemic or a recession or whatever's going on, you know, if you ever feel like this is a time where things can't happen based on everything you're hearing in the news, you know, every crisis sadly can also be, or for good reasons, can also be an opportunity. And, you know, Tommy wrote a script that was set in Norway, which was a country that wasn't too badly affected by the pandemic, and was written in a way that was very COVID friendly in terms of limited cast and remote location, and was most importantly really good. And so, you know, at the same time that all these other projects were grinding to a halt, from the moment we got the script, we felt like this is a movie we can go make this year. And we were very fortunate with the cast that came on board and our partners that came on board, and just went and made it. And that was a really refreshing feeling at a time where, you know, anytime you guys, for the audience to know, anytime a movie gets made, it's a small miracle. Anytime a movie gets made during a pandemic, it's a big miracle. And anytime a movie can get made that quickly in a pandemic, that was almost like an act of God or something. So yeah, that was crazy. We're running low on time. So Tommy, I want to stay with you, and then I'll go to Leon and finally April. But we have a lot of aspiring and working screenwriters paying attention. What's the biggest piece of advice that you could offer?
I would say, for me, I can only explain what worked for me and what helped me. And coming from Norway, because Norway, when I started, Norway was a very old-fashioned film country, and they made a certain type of film. And so there was a lot of us coming up that wanted to work on film, and we were frustrated with the stuff getting made. And it felt like a lot of people in Norway at that time made films because they wanted to win awards, or because they made films with an agenda, thinking that they will be renowned, or this is what the audience wants. And so what me and my friends did was that we just made films that we wanted to see ourselves, that we felt like we loved, and that we loved growing up, but we're inspired by that. And we never thought a second for what critics might think or what audience would embrace or not. We were like, okay, this is the film I want to see. And that's what we made. And luckily it turned out that a lot of people liked it and wanted to see it too. So
write what you want to see.
Yeah, or what you love, or what you what you get a kick out of. And because again, like I said back then, I'm sure it was the same in Finland and in Scandinavia in general. It's only lasted really 10 years that genre films had exploded in Scandinavia. I mean, I think Dead Snow was the second horror movie in 50 years that came out. Like it was absurd. But after now in Scandinavia in general, there's so much great genre coming through, which is refreshing compared to when I grew up.
Great, thank you. Leon, what would be the one piece of advice you'd want to impart?
Yeah, I mean, adding on to what Tommy said, which I think is great, like chase the thing that you believe in, is curate your career. And what I mean by that is when I at the end of last year, I told my reps, I want us to be really thoughtful about the projects that we're picking up and the people that we're working with specifically. Like, I don't want to work with people who are like just bad people who lie, people who misrepresent things, people who are prejudiced or don't want to work with women or whatever. I wanted to work with people who I sort of believed in, because I think that we're kind of in the propaganda business, in the sense that we're selling dreams and fantasies and hopes and beliefs to people. And I just didn't want to be aligned with people who were against that. So part of the push for me, XYZ, ARM, and I talked about it, one of the bigger frustrations, but also points of pride, and one of the things that's helped me in my career is that I probably much more than maybe I should, or maybe people think I should, but at this level in my career, I've turned down like a lot of stuff, walked away from a few things. And the irony of that is that the no part of your repertoire, like when you tell people you're not going to do something, sort of changes the stuff that you do get to do. So there's much bigger projects with much bigger names that I've been able to work with and sort of be attached to, partially because I wasn't sitting around working on a project where I was being crazy underpaid, where everyone was a jerk and it wasn't fun. So pick the people that you believe in, and pick the projects that you really believe in. So RM and XYZ are part of that for me. You guys can all send your scripts to RM. He will read them all by this weekend. No, JK, don't do that. But if you are lucky enough to find someone like an RM, someone who really believes in talent, really believes in work, and who's giving you thoughtful notes and just wants to give people a shot, then hold on forever, because those people are very rare.
Thank you for that advice, and thanks for the kind words. It's really, really cool. April?
I mean, yeah, what Leanna and Tommy said is stuff that I abide by as well. And I think the only thing I would add is just to clarify in terms of when you get that shot, when you get to be in front of someone and talk about things, bring your joy. People respond to joy, and they respond to your enthusiasm about things, because it is a long process to make anything, and sometimes it's longer than others. But if they see your joy about this script, this idea, this film that you want to direct, anything, I think that it's more likely than not that they will reciprocate and will want to work with you. No one wants to work with someone who is just kind of like barely into the idea. So if you are really fully committed to something, like show why you are the person who would have the energy to bring something to this project.
That's amazing, and that reminds me of my favorite athlete was a basketball player named Kobe Bryant, and one of the things he said that I really loved was, don't do whatever the pursuit is, don't do it for the end goal. Don't do it because you want to see your credit at the end of the film, or that you want to be at the premiere. That's not what the joy is about. That's not what the journey is about. The joy is about, getting the idea and writing it in the binder, and then figuring out how to wake up early, even though you have a day job, and stay up late and work on the script and do that and find your routine and go out there and network and meet the right people and fall in love with the story and bring that passion and dedication every single day. Because if you're doing it just for the bright lights, then there's other things you could be doing, and the bright lights aren't going to come for you if that's the reason. You have to do it because of the love of the game, the love of the storytelling, the films, the TV shows, and the process and the hard work that comes with that. So I think that's really good feedback. I want to answer one question that's come up a few times before we close out here, which is, we had a few people ask, coming from Finland and being on the other side of the world, how do I get people in Hollywood to read my scripts? The answer is, it's very hard. And you're gonna deal with a lot of people who don't get back to you. And for liability reasons, for time and bandwidth reasons, or just for lack of interest, frankly, the main things I tell you is, work on shows and films in Finland, because more than ever, the world is small, and somebody who's written something in Finland or Norway or wherever is going to get noticed by people in Hollywood. So it doesn't necessarily need to be that you wrote a Hollywood script. It could be that you wrote something really good for your local territory that got noticed by Hollywood. And the other thing I'd say is enter into screenwriting competitions, enter into, just look online, look and see what's going on in terms of like, are there places that you can send your script? And there's tons of them where you might actually get some notice and acclaim because studio people, producers, everybody's paying attention to those. So in Leon's case, he wrote a great script that made it to the blacklist, which really kicked off his career in a big way. You know, for us, there's so many projects that we hear about, whether it's a short film that someone's made or a script that that made it into a contest and got some acclaim that way. I would say start there and do that double approach prong where you're working locally, because the local films with things like Netflix and streaming services are being seen now by Hollywood and noticed. And then also put your stuff into competitions and just do a simple Google search, and you can find all kinds of different competitions where if your script wins or even doesn't win, it might get read by the right person who then reaches out to you. On that note, I want to bring this to a close because we're out of time. I want to thank our wonderful panelists for this masterclass, Leon, Tommy, April. You guys have been absolutely amazing. Thank you for taking the 90 minutes from your life to impart your experiences and wisdom. And I hope it's been helpful for everybody paying attention and listening out there. I want to thank Tampere, Helsinki, and Oulu, as well as ATFI for putting this together, organizing it, and making it happen. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a big Finnopile, very proud to have made the first American film in Finland, and very eager to make more, and hope to be doing it with some of you guys who are in the audience today in the future. So thanks again, really appreciate everybody's time, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you.
Bye guys.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.